I'll never forget the day I drove down Maple Creek Road and nearly slammed on my brakes. Right there on my 5-acre property stood a brand new $1 million mansion complete with marble pillars, imported Italian tiles, and a giant bronze gate that read "Property of the HOA President, Claire Whitmore." At first I thought I'd made a wrong turn, but when I checked the map, my heart dropped. No mistake. That was my land, the one I'd bought 10 years ago for retirement. Claire, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, had literally built her empire on my soil. And she didn't just trespass, she acted like she owned the place. I could have blown up in rage. But instead, I smiled. Because I knew one thing Claire didn't: you can steal land, but you can't erase ownership records. Before we dive into the chaos, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. And don't forget to subscribe, because this story only gets crazier from here. 10 years before that absurd moment, Maple Creek was nothing more than a stretch of empty lots and farmland, peaceful, quiet, and free from HOA nonsense. I bought 5 acres on the southern ridge, bordered by a stream and a few pine trees, thinking it would be my little sanctuary after retirement. I wasn't rich, just practical. I'd saved for decades working as a civil engineer, so I knew good land when I saw it. The soil was firm, the water line steady, and the paperwork clean. I filed every deed, tax, receipt, and property survey meticulously. It was my nest egg, my peace of mind. Years passed. I kept paying the property tax, never missed a year. I planned to build a small log cabin there one day, something simple. But life got busy and I only drove by the area once in a while. Then development began to creep in. First came the paved roads, then a grocery store, then inevitably the homeowners association. Enter Claire Whitmore. You'd recognize her type instantly, the kind of woman who always wears bright pastel suits, oversized sunglasses, and a smile that hides a knife behind it. She wasn't elected president of the Maple Creek HOA. She installed herself there. Her husband owned a local contracting company, and together they turned that once humble area into a playground for their egos. At first, I thought the HOA wouldn't affect me. My land wasn't technically part of the subdivision they built their little paradise a few streets away. But Claire didn't like boundaries. She liked power, and power to her meant expansion. I started hearing whispers from old neighbors, stories about Claire sending letters to people outside the HOA, demanding maintenance fees and zoning compliance. Some folks ignored her. Others got bullied into paying just to avoid the headache. There were even rumors she threatened to have people's properties annexed if they didn't cooperate. I laughed it off back then. Good luck annexing me, I said. My land sat on the county edge, and the legal paperwork clearly excluded me from any HOA jurisdiction. Still, I made a mental note to keep my documents safe. Then about 2 years ago, I drove by after a business trip and noticed something odd: survey flags. Dozens of them. Bright orange markers running across my property line. At first, I thought the county was checking utilities. But when I followed the line, it led to a construction site, bulldozers, cement trucks, and workers leveling the ground. My ground. I pulled over, heart pounding, and walked right up to the foreman. "Hey, this area's private property," I said, trying to stay calm. The man wiped his forehead, shrugged, and said, "Talk to the HOA, buddy. They're building the new president's house here." I froze. "The president? You mean Claire?" He nodded. "Yeah, Mrs. Whitmore. She said she got all the paperwork approved. We started last week." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Approved by who I owned this land. I had the title framed in my study. When I asked to see the permits, the foreman refused. "Not my problem," he said. "If you've got an issue, take it up with the office." The office, of course, was Claire's HOA headquarters, an overdecorated clubhouse with a fake marble fountain and a gold plaque that read "Community Integrity and Leadership." The irony almost made me choke. When I arrived, Claire was there standing in front of her adoring committee. Her voice carried across the lobby like a politician's, smooth, fake, and dripping with superiority. She was wearing a white blazer, pearls, and that smug grin of hers that made you want to check your pockets after every conversation. I waited until she finished her speech about beautifying the community before stepping forward. "Excuse me, Mrs. Whitmore," I said evenly. "You're building on my land." Her smile didn't even falter. "Oh, that area. I believe it's under the HOA's new zoning expansion. We obtained approval months ago." "Approval from who?" I asked. "From the city council, of course. Everything's in order," she replied, pretending to shuffle imaginary papers. "If there's been a misunderstanding, feel free to contact our legal department." She turned away like I was a mosquito buzzing near her wine glass. That's when I realized this wasn't just arrogance, it was intentional. She genuinely believed she could steamroll me with fake confidence and bureaucratic bluster. I went home furious but composed. Years in engineering had taught me one thing: paperwork doesn't lie. I pulled out my deed, maps, and records. Everything was valid, signed, and filed properly with the county. Yet somehow she had gotten a construction permit. The next morning, I visited the county recorder's office. After 2 hours of waiting and explaining, the clerk frowned at her screen. "That's strange," she muttered. "According to this, your parcel was transferred to Maple Creek HOA Holdings 2 years ago." My blood went cold. "Transferred to who? Maple Creek HOA Holdings," she repeated. "It says the signature matches yours, but—" She squinted at the screen. "It looks odd." I asked for a printed copy. When she handed it to me, I felt like the floor had vanished. The signature at the bottom looked like mine, but it wasn't. Someone had forged my name on a quitclaim deed. That's when the puzzle started coming together. Claire had connections at the city office. Her husband's company handled infrastructure projects. Somewhere along the line, she'd found a way to file a fraudulent deed, making it look like I'd transferred my land to the HOA. It was a scheme built on arrogance and paperwork manipulation. And it worked until I showed up. I walked out of that office with a copy of the forgery in my hand, shaking, but determined. Claire thought she could bury me under red tape. She didn't realize she'd just handed me a shovel. From that moment, I knew one thing for certain: this wasn't about land anymore. It was about principle, about standing up to someone who thought she could rewrite ownership just because she wore heels and held a clipboard. And if Claire Whitmore wanted a war, then she'd just declared it on the wrong man. 2 days later, I drove straight to the construction site again, this time with every document I owned: deed, title, county tax receipts, the whole arsenal. The mansion's steel frame was already rising out of the dirt like a monument to arrogance. Trucks came and went, men in hard hats hammering, welding, shouting. It was a full-scale operation on my land. The foreman saw me approach and immediately frowned. "Sir, we already told you. You need to take this up with the HOA." "I am the HOA's problem," I snapped, cutting him off. "And you're trespassing on my property. Shut it down now." He raised his hands. "Hey, I'm just doing my job." Then he pointed to a black Range Rover parked nearby. "You want to talk about it? Talk to her." The car door opened and out stepped Claire Whitmore, dressed like she was attending a photo shoot instead of overseeing illegal construction. White tailored suit, diamond earrings, perfectly styled hair, and that ever-present smug grin that made my blood boil. "Ah, Mr. Dawson," she said in her silky, patronizing tone. "I was hoping we'd meet again. I heard you've been quite emotional about our little project." Emotional? I held up the folder in my hand. "You forged my signature, Claire. You're building a mansion on my property." "Oh, your property." She smiled sweetly like a teacher humoring a slow student. "I think you're mistaken. The HOA zoning maps clearly show this parcel as part of Maple Creek Residential Expansion Phase 2. "Then your maps are garbage," I said sharply. "This land's been under my name for over a decade. I've got every document to prove it." Her smile never faded. She took a step closer, heels crunching the gravel. "Documents can be outdated, Mr. Dawson. Maybe you didn't keep up with the latest administrative changes. I checked with the county myself." I shot back. "Someone filed a quitclaim deed with my forged signature. That's a felony." Claire blinked slowly, as if pretending to be surprised. "Forged. Oh, I'm sure it's just a clerical error. These things happen." "You mean you make them happen?" I said. Her lips twitched just a tiny crack in her mask. Then she turned to the foreman and said coldly, "Continue the work. Don't let this man interfere again. I'll handle it." The workers hesitated, unsure what to do. I took a step forward and shouted, "You touch one more brick and I'll have the sheriff here, within the hour." Claire's expression hardened. "You don't scare anyone here, Mr. Dawson. This is HOA jurisdiction. And unless you want a trespassing charge of your own, I suggest you leave my property." The audacity almost made me laugh. "Your property? You really believe your own lies, don't you?" "Belief has nothing to do with it," she said, voice lowering. "Paperwork does." That line stuck with me long after I left. She was right in one sense. She didn't need to believe her lies. She just needed them to look official long enough for everyone else to accept them. But she underestimated me. I wasn't some retiree she could intimidate with HOA letters and threats of fines. I'd worked with government contractors for 20 years. I knew how to read zoning maps, permits, and property codes. And I knew exactly where to hit her, where it hurt. That night, I scanned every document, annotated every clause, and began creating a timeline of events when the forgery appeared, who filed it, and who approved it. Every trail led back to the same place, Maple Creek HOA headquarters, and one named Claire Whitmore. The next morning, I called my lawyer, a man named Alan Brooks, a calm, quiet type who didn't look like much, but had the patience of a monk and the bite of a pit bull when it came to property law. After showing him the paperwork, Alan leaned back in his chair, adjusted his glasses, and said, "This is a forged quitclaim deed, no doubt about it. But Claire didn't do this alone. She had help inside the zoning office." "Can we prove it?" I asked. "We can try," he said. "But it'll take time, and she'll probably throw everything she's got at you first. Expect harassment, false notices, maybe even legal threats." "Are you ready for that?" I smiled grimly. "She built a mansion on my land, Alan. I'm not going anywhere." Within a week, his prediction came true. I started receiving letters, lots of them. HOA violation notice, unpermitted storage, excessive debris on property. None of them made sense. They even fined me for failing to mow the community easement. My land was 5 miles outside their jurisdiction. It was laughable. But the point wasn't the fines, it was intimidation. Claire wanted to make me miserable, to drain my time and money until I gave up. Every letter had her name neatly typed at the bottom like a signature of arrogance. When I didn't respond, she escalated. One evening, I found a bright orange stop work order taped to my shed, even though I wasn't building anything. Then a few days later, I caught 2 HOA inspectors snooping around my property, taking photos. I stepped outside with my phone recording. "Hey, you got a warrant," I called out. One of them mumbled, "We're just doing an inspection for compliance." Compliance for what? I barked. "You're trespassing. This isn't HOA territory." They left quickly, muttering something about orders from Mrs. Whitmore. That was the last straw. I filed a formal complaint with the county sheriff's office. The deputy listened, looked over my documents, and whistled. "Buddy, you've got yourself a real case here," he said. "If she's falsifying documents and enforcing HOA rules outside her boundaries, that's fraud and abuse of authority. I'll forward this to our legal division." But I wasn't content to wait. I wanted to confront her one last time, face to face, with the truth in hand. So I returned to the construction site one evening when the sun was setting. Her mansion stood half-finished, bathed in golden light like a monument to corruption. Claire was there, of course, inspecting the progress clipboard in hand, barking orders like a general. When she saw me, she sighed dramatically. "Oh, not you again. I just came to give you one last chance," I said calmly. "Stop the construction. Withdraw your false deed, or I'll take you to court." She laughed. "Court over a zoning issue? Please. You don't have the money or the influence to win." I looked her straight in the eye and smiled. "You're right about one thing, Claire. Paperwork matters, and I have real paperwork." Her laughter faded when I held up the certified copy from the county clerk, proof of the forgery stamped and sealed. "Enjoy your mansion while you can," I said, "because soon you'll be living in the courtroom." For the first time, I saw fear flicker in her eyes. Just for a second. Then she forced another smirk and said, "Good luck, Mr. Dawson. You'll need it." She turned and walked away, but I knew the war had officially begun. After that confrontation, I stopped reacting out of anger and started operating with precision. Claire wanted a screaming match. What she didn't expect was quiet strategy. I'd learned long ago that rage burns fast, but paperwork endures forever. I spent the next few weeks buried in records. Every morning after my coffee, I drove downtown to the county clerk's office. The clerks began recognizing me. "Morning, Mr. Dawson," they'd say, sliding boxes of dusty documents across the counter. I went through every line, every zoning revision, every public hearing transcript connected to the Maple Creek HOA. It didn't take long to realize the rabbit hole was deeper than I'd imagined. The HOA had submitted 3 zoning requests over the past 4 years, each one suspiciously approved within days when the average turnaround was months. Even stranger, one of the approvals contained a reference to parcel 771B, which just happened to be my lot. The description matched perfectly 5-acre ridge bordered by the Western Creek. That parcel number didn't belong to the HOA at all, it belonged to me. I highlighted everything, made copies, and compared signatures. Whoever had approved the transfer used the same signature that appeared on my forged quitclaim deed. The name underneath read Deputy Zoning Officer Michael L. Trent. I didn't know the man personally, but a quick online search showed photos of him at ribbon cuttings, always standing next to none other than Claire Whitmore and her husband. The 3 of them smiled for the camera, like the cover of a real estate brochure. It was all there, the web of influence, the cozy backroom approvals, the fast-track permits. My land hadn't been stolen by accident, it was orchestrated. Alan, my lawyer, nearly choked on his coffee when he saw the file. "This isn't just a property dispute," he said, voice low. "It's public corruption." "Can we nail them on it?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "If we can prove collusion between Claire and that zoning officer, yes. But we'll need solid evidence. Emails, correspondence, anything that shows intent. Then we find it," I said. "All of it." The next phase was like a full-blown investigation. I filed Freedom of Information Act requests for every permit, zoning change, and inspection record tied to the HOA's development. Alan's firm hired a private investigator to look into the zoning officer's connections. And the results? Worse than I expected. Trent's brother-in-law worked for Whitmore Contracting LLC, Claire's husband's company. Payments had been quietly issued from that firm to consulting invoices with Trent's initials on them. It was a kickback scheme money for rubber-stamped approvals. The HOA was essentially laundering legitimacy through corruption. But to win in court, we couldn't just accuse. We needed proof that the HOA knowingly benefited from the fraud. That meant tracing the money and confronting the witnesses. Alan and I paid a visit to a man named Stephen Cook, a former accountant for the HOA who'd quit 2 years prior. He worked at a small tax office in town now, pale and nervous, always glancing at the door like he expected Claire herself to walk in. When I introduced myself, he stiffened. "I can't get involved," he said immediately. "Stephen," I said, gently sliding a photo across the table. "This is my land. She built her mansion on it, and your name's on the accounting report that paid for the construction permits." He looked at the paper for a long moment, then sighed. "You didn't hear this from me," he said. "But Claire used HOA funds to push that permit through. She told me to classify it as a community facility expense. When I asked questions, she fired me." "Do you have proof?" Alan asked. Stephen hesitated, then reached into his drawer and pulled out a USB drive. "I made backups. I figured one day she'd go too far." We had our smoking gun. That night I sat at my desk staring at the files. Payments, forged deeds, internal emails, it was all there. Every dirty trick Claire had pulled, every signature she'd bought. I felt a strange mix of anger and satisfaction. She'd built her empire on deceit, and now the whole structure was about to collapse. Still, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. The deeper we dug, the more dangerous it felt. These weren't just HOA fines and fake letters anymore. We were talking criminal charges, political connections, and reputations that people would destroy to protect. And right on cue, the harassment escalated. I started receiving anonymous calls at night. Silence on the other end. Sometimes a voice would whisper, "You should have just let it go." One morning I found my mailbox torn off and thrown into the ditch. Another day, someone slashed my truck tires. I reported everything to the sheriff, who promised extra patrols, but we both knew who was behind it. Claire was getting desperate. She even called me once out of the blue. Her tone was suddenly sweet, almost apologetic. "Mr. Dawson, I think we've both been a little hasty," she purred. "Maybe we can settle this without dragging everyone through court." I laughed bitterly. "You mean before the county finds out about the forged deeds and your zoning bribes?" Her tone turned sharp. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "Oh, I do," I said. "A woman who built her castle on a swamp of lies. And I'm the guy holding the drain plug." Click, she hung up. Alan filed the official lawsuit the following week: fraud, forgery, illegal annexation, and property theft. When the news broke, local media went wild. HOA President under investigation for land fraud flashed across the headlines. Reporters swarmed Maple Creek. Claire tried to save face, claiming it was a clerical misunderstanding. Her mansion construction halted temporarily, but she continued to act like nothing was wrong, smiling at cameras, attending HOA meetings, pretending the foundation beneath her house wasn't about to crack. But the cracks widened fast. Trent, the zoning officer, was suspended pending investigation. The city council launched an ethics review. And behind the scenes, Stephen Cook's USB files were handed to the district attorney's office. The DA called me personally. "Mr. Dawson, if this checks out, you're not just getting your land back, you're helping expose one of the biggest local frauds we've seen in years." I didn't say it out loud, but I smiled. Not out of vengeance, out of justice. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. The storm was still raging, but I'd found my footing again. Claire's arrogance had blinded her to the one truth every tyrant forgets. When you think you own everything, you stop checking who actually does. And soon the entire town was about to find out who the real owner was. If I'd learned anything from dealing with tyrants, it's this: once you corner them with the truth, they don't surrender, they retaliate. And Claire Whitmore was the queen of retaliation. The very next week after the lawsuit went public, I woke up to find a bright red notice of eviction taped to my front door. It was from the Maple Creek HOA Enforcement Division, claiming I was occupying HOA property without authorization. The kicker, my actual home, was 3 miles outside their boundary line. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. It wasn't even a legal document, just HOA letterhead and Claire's looping signature at the bottom like she was branding cattle. But as absurd as it looked, it set the tone for what was coming. By noon, I'd already received 6 emails from community compliance, threatening to fine me $5,000 a week for non-compliant storage sheds. Someone even posted on the neighborhood Facebook group accusing me of being a dangerous squatter. The post was signed by an anonymous HOA member, but the writing style was pure, Claire dramatic, self-righteous, and riddled with exclamation marks. She wasn't just fighting me legally anymore. She was trying to destroy my reputation. I ignored the nonsense at first, but things escalated fast. One afternoon I was working in my garage when 2 HOA inspectors showed up again, clipboard warriors wearing neon vests and smug smiles. "Afternoon, sir," one said. "We've received complaints about unapproved vehicles on this property." "Complaints," I said, wiping my hands. "From who? Can't disclose that, sir. HOA privacy policy." I pointed at the road. "This property isn't under HOA jurisdiction. You're trespassing. Leave now, or I'll call the sheriff." They didn't budge. One of them started taking photos of my truck. That's when I pulled out my phone and started recording. "This is your final warning," I said evenly. "You take one more photo and you'll be explaining it to the county judge." The man froze, looked at his partner, and they left without another word. I uploaded the video to the same neighborhood Facebook group where Claire had been spreading lies. Within an hour, it had over 3,000 views and 100 comments, half furious homeowners, half shocked residents who had no idea the HOA had gone this far. The tide of public opinion began to shift. But Claire wasn't done. The next morning I received a letter from her attorney, an official cease and desist. It accused me of defamation, harassment, and inciting public hostility toward the HOA. Alan chuckled when he read it. "Classic intimidation tactic," he said. "Don't take the bait." "I won't," I said, but deep down I was getting tired. Every day brought a new letter, a new rumor, a new act of pettiness. Claire was like a hornet. You could swat her, but she'd keep stinging until someone took away her wings. And that's when she made her biggest mistake. She organized a special HOA meeting at the community clubhouse, inviting all concerned residents to discuss my ongoing violations. Alan suggested we attend. "If she's going to slander you publicly, let's make sure the truth gets recorded," he said. So I showed up. The room was packed, over 100 people sitting in folding chairs under flickering fluorescent lights. At the front stood Claire, dressed in a blinding magenta suit, standing beside a projector, showing aerial photos of my land. She pointed dramatically with a laser pointer. "Here," she said loudly, "is where Mr. Dawson's illegal structure interferes with community development. And here," she clicked again, "is where we plan to expand the community garden once this dispute is resolved." The audience murmured in confusion. Some people looked skeptical. Others were clearly in her camp. I raised my hand. "You're showing photos of my land, private property that you forged a deed for. Would you like to explain that part, Mrs. Whitmore?" She blinked, flustered, then recovered with a smirk. "Mr. Dawson, this isn't about you personally. This is about what's best for the community." "The community," I said evenly, "doesn't benefit from fraud." Gasps filled the room. Claire's jaw tightened. "I will not be insulted in my own meeting," she snapped. Alan stood and calmly held up a folder. "For the record, Mrs. Whitmore, we've already filed a civil suit citing forgery, misuse of HOA funds, and illegal property annexation. Perhaps the community would like to see those documents." She froze. Her face went pale. Someone from the back shouted, "Is that true?" Another voice, "Did you really forge a deed?" Claire's composure cracked like thin ice. "This meeting is adjourned," she barked and stormed out, heels clacking against the tile. The room erupted in whispers. Some people followed her. Others came up to me quietly, shaking my hand. "Good for you," one older man said. "She's been bullying people here for years." "About time someone stood up to her," said another. It was the first time I realized this fight wasn't just mine. I was standing up for every homeowner who'd been pushed, fined, or humiliated by her. That night I got a text from an unknown number. "You think you're a hero, watch what happens next." The next morning my driveway was covered in trash, bags of it dumped right across the entrance. HOA flyers scattered all over with Dawson, the squatter, written in red marker. I didn't even bother cleaning it up. I called the sheriff again. This time they sent a full patrol unit. When the deputy saw the mess, he whistled softly. "Looks like harassment to me." "Want to press charges?" I nodded. "Absolutely." We pulled the security footage from my cameras. At 2:13 a.m., a dark SUV backed into my driveway. The license plate was clear as day, MCHOA-01, the official HOA vehicle. The deputy raised an eyebrow. "That's not good for them." "No," I said. "It's perfect." Alan grinned when I told him. You realize she's just turned this civil case into a criminal one, right? I grinned back. Good. Let's see how she handles real consequences. We filed additional charges for harassment, property damage, and trespassing. Within a week, the DA's office opened a parallel investigation. Local news picked it up again. HOA President accused of retaliation against landowner blared across the headlines. Claire tried to spin it, of course. She held a press conference outside her half-finished mansion, crying fake tears about being victimized by misinformation. But the public wasn't buying it anymore. Too many people had seen what she'd done firsthand. Every brick of that mansion became a monument to her arrogance. And as I watched the media turn on her, I realized something. Revenge wasn't about shouting louder, it was about letting the truth speak for itself. I didn't need to destroy Claire. She was already doing that all by herself. By the time the court date arrived, the story had spread far beyond our small county. Local TV stations were running nightly updates. The headlines were ruthless: HOA, Queen faces fraud allegations. Mansion built on stolen land. President of Maple Creek HOA under fire. Claire tried everything to delay the inevitable filing continuances, claiming illness, changing lawyers, but nothing worked. The judge, tired of the circus, set a firm trial date. That morning, I stood outside the courthouse, clutching my worn leather folder of documents, the same one she once laughed at. Alan, my attorney, looked calm, sipping his coffee. Remember, he said, we don't have to prove she's evil. We just have to prove she lied. I smirked. Lucky for us, she's made a career out of that. When Claire arrived, she made her usual grand entrance: expensive navy suit, oversized sunglasses, fake confidence, radiating like cheap perfume. Cameras flashed as she walked up the steps, pretending to be the victim of some great misunderstanding. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. HOA board members sat behind her, whispering nervously. A few of my neighbors were there too, people she'd bullied for years, hoping to see the empire finally crumble. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Marianne Keller, a no-nonsense woman with gray hair and a stare sharp enough to cut granite, presided over the case. Alan began with a calm opening statement. Your Honor, this is not a zoning dispute. This is a story of forgery, fraud, and abuse of power. My client, Mr. Dawson, is the rightful owner of the land on which the defendant constructed a multi-million-dollar mansion using falsified documents and public influence. Claire's attorney, a slick corporate type named Gregory Mann, stood to respond. Your Honor, my client acted in good faith. Any clerical mistakes were the result of miscommunication between county offices. There was no intent to defraud. Intent, Alan said later, leaning forward. We'll see about that. The first few hours were a blur of paperwork and technical testimony. County clerks, land surveyors, and zoning officers took the stand. Most were nervous, especially Michael Trent, the deputy zoning officer who had signed off the false transfer. When Alan called him to testify, the tension in the room thickened. Mr. Trent, Alan began, you approved a zoning revision transferring parcel 771B to Maple Creek. HOA correct? Yes, Trent mumbled. And that parcel was originally owned by my client. Yes. Did you verify the legitimacy of the quitclaim deed? He hesitated, glancing nervously toward Claire. I was told the paperwork had been reviewed by her office. By her office? Alan asked pointedly. Mrs. Whitmore is not a government official. Why would her office be reviewing land transfers? Trent swallowed hard. She said the HOA had obtained community consent. Alan raised a brow. And she paid you for consulting work around that same time, didn't she? Trent froze. The room went silent. Judge Keller's eyebrow lifted. Answer the question, Mr. Trent. He sighed. Yes, she did. A low murmur rippled through the audience. Claire's attorney shot up. Objection irrelevant, overruled, said the judge. Continue, Mr. Brooks. Alan leaned closer. And what was the payment for? Trent's voice cracked. She said it was for community zoning assistance. But I knew it wasn't, so you knowingly accepted payment to fast-track her permit. Trent nodded miserably. Yes, the courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously. Claire's face turned stone white. When it was her turn on the stand, she tried to regain her composure. She spoke in her usual condescending tone, all smiles and rehearsed sympathy. Your Honor, she said sweetly, I've always worked tirelessly for this community. Everything I've done has been in good faith. If a paperwork error occurred, it was certainly not intentional. Alan stepped up for cross-examination. Mrs. Whitmore, do you recognize this document? He held up a printed email. She glanced at it, eyes narrowing. I don't recall, Funny Alan said. It's an email from your personal address to Mr. Trent, dated the same week the deed was filed. You wrote, and I quote, We need this done quickly before the Dawson parcel gets flagged. Use the HOA's community expansion code and I'll handle the signatures. Her mouth opened, then closed again. That could be fabricated. The metadata says otherwise, Alan said smoothly. It came directly from your server authenticated by the county's IT division. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Whitmore, are you denying you sent this email? Claire's eyes darted around. I don't remember sending it. Alan's next move sealed the deal. Then perhaps this will help your memory. He held up a USB drive. Contained here are the HOA's financial ledgers, courtesy of your former accountant, Stephen Cook. They show $22 0 payments to Michael Trent, labeled as consulting. They also include invoices for construction materials billed to the HOA, but delivered directly to your mansion site. Claire's face twisted. That man is lying, Alan smiled. He's sitting right over there, Mrs. Whitmore. Shall we call him back? The room burst into whispers again. Claire's lawyer slumped in his chair. Judge Keller slammed her gavel. Order. She looked at Claire coldly. Mrs. Whitmore, I suggest you answer carefully. This court takes forgery and bribery very seriously. By the afternoon, the evidence was overwhelming. Photos, bank transfers, witness testimony, it all stacked neatly like dominoes waiting for the final push. Alan gave his closing argument with quiet power. This case is not just about land, it's about accountability. Mrs. Whitmore used her title and influence to manipulate public trust, to take what was never hers, and to silence those who dared to question her. But no title, no mansion, no forged deed can erase the truth. When Claire's lawyer stood for his closing remarks, even he looked defeated. He muttered something about administrative confusion, but no one was listening. The air was thick with inevitability. Judge Keller took only 20 minutes to deliberate. When she returned, her voice was firm. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Dawson. The quitclaim deed is null and void. Full ownership of parcel 771B is hereby restored. Furthermore, Mrs. Whitmore is found guilty of fraudulent misrepresentation and is ordered to compensate the plaintiff for damages and legal costs. Claire's jaw dropped. You can't, this is ridiculous. I built a home there. The judge stared her down. Then I suggest you start unbuilding it. Court adjourned. The gavel struck, echoing like thunder. As I stepped outside, reporters swarmed. Mr. Dawson, how do you feel? I smiled faintly. Like justice, just check back in. Behind me, Claire stumbled down the courthouse steps surrounded by cameras. Her perfect facade had cracked the confident HOA president, replaced by a woman who'd built her mansion on lies. And now those lies were crumbling faster than her marble walls ever could. For the first time in months, I woke up without that pit in my stomach. The kind that comes from fighting a war you didn't start but had no choice but to finish. The court had ruled in my favor. My land was mine again, fair and square. Claire's mansion, her glittering hollow monument to ego, was now an illegal structure standing on stolen soil. But I knew Claire Whitmore wasn't the type to vanish quietly. Sure enough, 2 days after the verdict, my lawyer Alan called. You're not going to like this, he said grimly. She's filed an appeal. I laughed. Of course she did. The woman would try to out-argue gravity if it meant getting her way. Alan chuckled softly. Don't worry. The evidence is airtight. She's just buying time. Meanwhile, the county's building authority is already issuing a demolition notice for her mansion. Unless she can relocate it, which she can't, she's about to lose everything. I drove out to the property later that week, just to see it one last time before the inevitable. Her mansion looked eerily still. Construction had halted, scaffolding half torn down, and the golden letters spelling Whitmore Estate still hanging crookedly above the iron gate. It was quiet, too quiet. Then I noticed her. Claire stood at the edge of the property in jeans and a gray hoodie, a far cry from her usual pastel power suits. She was staring at the mansion like a ghost, looking at its own grave. When she saw me, her expression flickered between hatred and despair. You happy now, she said bitterly. You ruined me. I took a slow breath. You did that yourself, she scoffed, voice trembling. You think you're some hero. I built this neighborhood. I made it safe, beautiful, valuable, and corrupt. I cut in. You built all of this on other people's fear. And you built that. I gestured toward her mansion on my land. You didn't earn it. You stole it. She looked away, jaw clenched. You'll regret this. No, I said quietly. You will. I turned and walked back to my truck, leaving her to stand in the ruins of her own arrogance. A week later, the county sheriff's department arrived with demolition crews. News cameras rolled as the excavators tore through the marble columns. Every swing of the machine's arm felt like poetic justice. The reporters called it the fall of the HOA queen. Neighbors gathered along the road, some cheering, some shaking their heads in disbelief. One man clapped me on the shoulder. "You did it, Dawson. She's been bullying everyone here for years. You gave us all some hope." Hope, that word stuck with me. Because it wasn't just about revenge anymore. This whole ordeal had exposed how easily power could twist something as simple as community into tyranny. Claire had used rules meant for harmony as weapons for control, and she almost got away with it. Almost. The weeks that followed were a blur of cleanup, legal paperwork, and endless phone calls. I got letters from strangers across the state, people thanking me for standing up to their own nightmare HOAs. Apparently my case had gone viral online. A few lawyers even joked that the Dawson Clause might become shorthand for anti-fraud reforms in future HOA laws. As for Claire, her empire collapsed quickly. Without her, the HOA board crumbled. Half the members resigned. The county revoked their charter. And when the financial audit came through, it turned out she'd embezzled tens of thousands of dollars in community improvement funds over the years. The district attorney pressed formal charges: fraud, forgery, misappropriation of public money. She faced up to 5 years in prison. Ironically, the same mansion she built on my land became the biggest piece of evidence against her. Photos of its foundation, zoning blueprints, material invoices, all of it tied her name to the fraud. I didn't celebrate when I heard the news of her arrest. There was no satisfaction in seeing someone dragged away in handcuffs, just quiet closure. When the county auctioned off the remnants of the HOA's assets, something poetic happened. The Maple Creek HOA property, the clubhouse, the office, the remaining land parcels all went up for sale. And guess who placed the winning bid? Me. Alan thought I was joking at first. "You really want to own the place that caused you this much pain?" "Exactly," I said, "because it's not going to cause anyone pain ever again." I bought it at a fraction of what Claire had spent trying to control it. Over the next few months, I turned that old HOA office into something different, a community learning center. No fees, no board, no fines. Just a place for kids to do homework, seniors to meet up, and locals to host workshops or movie nights. When we held the opening ceremony, dozens of families came. People brought food, music, laughter. The same neighbors who once whispered behind fences now shared tables and stories. The spirit of community, the real kind, was back. And then one sunny afternoon, I saw a familiar figure walking up the gravel path. Claire. She wasn't wearing pearls or makeup this time. She wore a plain county-issued uniform and carried a trash bag. A probation officer followed a few steps behind. Court-ordered community service. She avoided my eyes, but I caught her glance as she bent down to pick up litter near the fence line. For a second, I almost pitied her. Almost. "Welcome back to Maple Creek, Mrs. Whitmore," I said, my tone light but deliberate. Her face flushed red. "Don't talk to me." "Why not?" "You're part of the community now, right?" I smiled. This time for real. She glared at me but said nothing. And I didn't need her to. Watching her clean the same land she once stole was enough of a full-circle moment for me. As the sun set, I stood on the porch of what used to be the HOA's command center, now filled with laughter and music from inside, and I thought about everything that had happened. Revenge was sweet, sure, but justice was satisfying in a quieter, deeper way. It doesn't shout, it just balances. For all her lies, Claire taught me something important. You can't build a home metaphorically or literally on someone else's foundation. It'll always crumble eventually. And as I watched her rake leaves along the creek, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone. It's outliving their arrogance on your own terms, on your own land. 6 months after the dust settled, the land that once divided the neighborhood had become its heart. The laughter of children echoed where there used to be construction noise. The smell of fresh-cut grass replaced the scent of concrete dust. And every time I walked past the new Maple Creek Community Center, I couldn't help but smile. Where Claire's marble pillars once stood, we built a wide-open lawn with benches, a small playground, and a flower garden maintained by volunteers. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The most beautiful thing ever built on that property came after the mansion fell. We hosted our first summer festival there in July. Families brought food, kids played games, and a local band performed country songs under the stars. As the night went on, neighbors, many who hadn't spoken in years, started laughing together again. And at the center of it all stood a simple wooden sign I'd installed myself. It read, "Land belongs to those who respect it." That was all I needed to say. But life, as always, had one last twist in store. It was late August when Alan called me with news that made me pause mid-coffee sip. "You won't believe this," he said. "Claire's attorney just reached out." I sighed. What now? She's not trying to sue me again, is she? No, Alan replied. She's requesting to meet. I laughed out loud. Meet after everything. What could she possibly want an apology? Alan hesitated. She's being released early on probation. She said she wanted to talk, apparently something personal. Curiosity won. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a quiet diner near the county line. She was already there when I walked in. No makeup, no power suit, no entourage. Just Claire Whitmore, a woman who looked 20 years older than when I last saw her. Mr. Dawson, she greeted quietly. Her voice lacked its usual sharpness. Claire, I said, sitting across from her. I was told you wanted to talk. She nodded slowly. I did. Not to fight. Not anymore. I waited. She took a breath. You were right. About everything. I told myself for years that I was building something important. That the HOA mattered, that I mattered. But I wasn't leading a community. I was controlling one. That admission hit harder than I expected. She looked out the window, eyes distant. When they tore down that house, I felt like they were tearing me down with it. But I guess that's what needed to happen. For the first time, she wasn't performing. There was no pretense, no sarcasm, just a tired woman finally facing herself. I wanted to say I'm sorry, she whispered. Not that it fixes anything, but I am. I studied her for a long moment. You hurt a lot of people, Claire. You turned neighbors into enemies. You turned laws into weapons. She nodded. I know. I've been thinking about that every day. Then she looked at me again, a faint glimmer of her old pride returning. I heard you turned the HOA property into a community center. Yeah, I said. No membership fees, no rules. Just people helping each other. She smiled weakly. That's actually kind of poetic. There was a long silence. Then I said, if you really mean what you said, maybe you could help. The center's always looking for volunteers. Kids need mentors. Gardens need tending. She blinked, surprised. You'd let me come there, after everything. I shrugged. I believe people can change. The court gave you community service. Why not make it mean something? Her eyes filled with tears. Thank you, she whispered. Over the following months, she showed up quietly, consistently. She didn't talk much, but she worked hard. Planting flowers, painting fences, cleaning trash after events. The first few times the neighbors saw her, they were shocked. Some refused to speak to her. But as time passed, her humility did what no HOA bylaw ever could. It rebuilt trust. One Saturday morning, I saw her teaching a group of kids how to plant sunflowers. A small act, maybe, but powerful. Later that day, she walked over to me, wiping sweat from her brow. You know, she said, smiling softly, these kids don't care who I was. They only care that I show up. I grinned. That's the point, Claire. The past doesn't define you, what you do next does. She nodded, looking out over the blooming garden. I guess we both rebuilt something on that land. Months turned into a year. Maple Creek thrived. The HOA nightmare became local legend, a cautionary tale parents told new homeowners. People joked that I should write a book, How to Evict a Tyrant and Win Back Your Land. But to me, it was never about the victory. It was about the lesson that came after. One evening, after closing up the community center, I sat on the porch watching the sunset bleed gold over the hills. The air smelled of pine and barbecue smoke from a nearby picnic. Claire was locking up the garden shed, humming softly to herself. For the first time, I didn't see an enemy. I saw a neighbor, flawed, human learning. Sometimes life gives you enemies not to destroy, but to reveal who you really are. If I'd let anger guide me, I might have become just like Claire, consumed by power and pride. But choosing patience, proof, and persistence gave me something far greater than revenge. It gave me peace. Property lines can divide land, but character divides people. Claire taught me that you can own everything and still have nothing if you've lost your integrity. And she learned that no amount of marble, gold, or legal trickery can stand on a foundation of lies. So here's my message to everyone watching. If someone tries to take what's yours, your land, your dignity, your voice, don't fight them with hate. Fight them with truth. Because truth doesn't need permission to stand tall. And one day when the dust settles, you might just find that your biggest battles became your greatest blessings. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city and time zone in the comments below. And remember, always stand for what's right, even when you're standing alone.